Right, I have started the recording. So welcome again, everybody, to episode three of our lunchtime bite-sized EDI training events organized by the BSW Training Hub. This is episode three, and we're so glad to have James Eames with us from Shine. And apologies for having this session on a Monday. We normally have it on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but for this month, it's on a Monday, and I hope you don't mind. Like I said earlier, this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be uploaded on the BSW Training Hub website. Apologies for episode two. It's not yet uploaded. It's hopefully going to get uploaded either by the end of today or tomorrow, and it will be accessible from the BSW Training Hub website. And hopefully episode three also is uploaded at the same time as episode two, and you can have access to it. Just for everyone's awareness, we're going to have episode four. We'll put it in the chat box. Episode four is on EDNI and the staff experience in the Southwest. Dion Corsa will be running that event. It will be on the 1st of October. That will be a Tuesday. So hopefully all of you can join us for episode four. I'll put this message up at the end of the session as well. But very quickly, again, over to James to introduce himself and to take us off from here. Thanks for coming and joining us, James.
Thank you very much. Before I start anything, even finishing off the lovely introduction, this obviously is a presentation about neurodivergence, and it's likely for any of these that a few of the people present in the audience are also neurodivergent. So if anyone wants to contribute anyone's own knowledge or experience, whether you like personally are neurodivergent or if you know anyone else who is, just let me know. You can pop things in the chat or raise your hand, because there's some of the things we're talking about that I just have the second-hand experience with rather than first-hand experience, and I don't want anyone to feel like I'm misrepresenting their experience or such, because I know I hate it when that happens. So yeah, just throughout this, if there's anything where you think, actually, I think this is relevant, please do speak up. Always welcome. So today, the aim is we want to look at what is meant by neurodivergence and some of the challenges specifically reported by neurodivergent students and staff in the NHS. Ideally, you want people to be able to confidently have conversations with neurodivergent students and staff about their experiences and challenges they're facing, because that is something that people report is that they want to help, but it's difficult to know how to start that conversation. So hopefully this makes it a little bit easier. And then helping to identify resources, services and actions that you can take to support neurodivergent students and staff. I'm going to get sick of saying students and staff in a bit, but yes, so as we say, I am James. I have diagnoses of ADHD and more recently ASD. I'm a second year mental health nursing student at University of Derby, previously worked in domiciliary, and I'm always very happy to answer questions. So please, I will send out these slides to Isaac afterwards for them to be sent out. So my contact information is in there if anyone does have any further questions, or you just want to contact me and say, hey, that was all rubbish, what are you talking about? Whatever's fine. So quickly, Shine is sharing, well, they've changed it now, it's Staff and Student Healthcare Initiative for Neurodiversity and Equity. So all members are neurodivergent students or staff now, because a lot of people are qualified. So experts by experience, and it covers a very wide range of both nursing and allied healthcare professions. Also created the guide to practice-based learning, which I will link to at the end of this, and you can have a look through. But I'll be giving you the whistle-stop tour, is that the term? So what is neurodiversity? Because you'll hear some terms sort of like bandied around, neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So I think it's just in the mic. So neurodivergent is referring to anyone who diverges from typical mental functioning of the majority. I'm bringing the screen up so I can see what I'm doing. There we go, thank you. So the estimates for the prevalence of neurodivergence in the UK usually range from between 15 to 20%, which is around 1 in 7 to 1 in 5 people. Hence me saying earlier, there's probably at least a couple of people present who either maybe aren't diagnosed yet, but some form of neurodivergent. Those are the numbers from sort of a few different sources like ACAS, British Dyslexia Association and such. And then as opposed to neurodivergent, we have neurotypical. So that refers to any person who has typical, if typical means anything, neurological development or functioning. And neurodiversity is the word that sort of just refers to the concept in general, or the movement, essentially saying that there is natural variation in human neurological functioning. It's not always an impairment. It's not necessarily like a condition. It's just there's natural variation. To the extent that some people then do experience difficulties due to that, but also sometimes, if we probably already know about social model of disability, but not always innate impairments. Sometimes it's the interactions with the environment that sort of cause the impairment, and therefore making the environment more accessible, which is one of the things we'll be talking about, is essentially making people less disabled from that viewpoint. So neurodivergence, there we go. There's a lot of diagnoses that are covered by neurodivergence. So a lot of the sort of main ones that people have heard of are the ones in the neurodevelopmental section. So autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, which we'll have a quick talk about what they mean in a second. There's also tic disorders such as Tourette's, but there are growing amounts of people who have diagnoses typically seen as mental health, or sort of acquired is another one referring to stroke, TBI, brain hemorrhage, etc., who are identifying as neurodivergent because they do fit the bill essentially for the definition we're using for neurodivergent. But even, I think, more important than that, there's a lot of the challenges shared between those diagnoses. So trying to fit everyone into the specific, you're neurodivergent and you're not, even though they're experiencing the same challenges within the workplace setting, it isn't terribly productive. Yeah, as I said. So supporting people based off of their specific strengths and challenges, rather than trying to make a sweeping generalized statement about these diagnoses mean this, these conditions mean this, is generally more productive. So, like I said, we'll have a look at a couple of the types of neurotypes, is one of the terms used. So autism, you might have heard of it. The diagnostic criteria for autism tend to focus on the common behavioural characteristics. So differences in communication and social interaction, and insistence on sameness, or just liking to do the same thing over and over again, not liking uncertainty or change. ADHD, another more commonly known one. Some of the main impacts this can have is the effects on executive function, emotional regulation, working memory, time regulation, sleep, tolerance of stress and sensory information. So it's a lot more than just the attention part. There's essentially regulation sort of across a range of domains. Can be difficult with ADHD, so it can have effects sort of well beyond just the standard can't sit still in class sort of thing. Dyslexia, this more so than just like reading and writing, which is the general understanding, it can have general impact on someone's processing, which some of the general presentations are making reading, spelling and writing difficult, but dyslexia commonly has visual and auditory processing aspects. So if someone has the auditory processing aspect as well, they might find it more difficult to get benefits from things like text-to-speech. So some of the standard adjustments that you might consider might not be as effective, and it's not because they've got a different condition, it's just the variation within dyslexia. Dyscalculia, that is a specific and persistent difficulty understanding numbers, so like sense of number. Sense of number meaning rather than having to sort of do calculations manually to figure out this number is bigger than that one, etc. Or if I say to you, if you walk into a shop and you see a water bottle for £2.50 or for £25, which one of those is more realistic? Having to manually go back and say, well, I've seen all of these, rather than just being able to say, well, roughly the sense is £2.50, essentially. That it means that people might not present necessarily like they're having challenges, but they're having to do a lot more processes manually in the head, which can be more time consuming, more cause more fatigue over the long run. Could be quite a wide range of difficulties with mathematics with that one. And another one of sort of the main neurodevelopmental ones, dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, which impacts motor coordination, both like gross and fine. Some people might experience it more with fine motor coordination, some people with gross, some people lucky enough to get it across the board. But it can also affect sensory processing, memory, concentration, organisation and planning, that sort of thing, things that you might think of with ADHD or others, like we said, this crossover. But as we were saying as well, it refers to anyone who diverges from typical mental functions. So it's not limited to neurodevelopmental disorders. It's down to the specific individual about if they identify as neurodivergent or not. So some of the ones that people are more commonly identifying with as neurodivergent are bipolar disorder, which is sort of characterized by extreme changes in mood and energy levels. One of the interesting crossovers with bipolar disorder, it can be quite difficult to tell the difference between hypomania within bipolar type 2 and with sort of hyperactive, the hyperactive impulsive subtype of ADHD. Often you'll see the main way you might tell the difference is whether it's episodic or not, but then if someone with ADHD also has like recurrent depressive disorder, then it can become incredibly difficult to even draw the line between the two. So sometimes it just comes down to what treatment is working for them. Which I'm just saying, I know I'm getting a bit into the theory, but it's trying to back up the fact that going based purely off someone's diagnosis or lack thereof is not an effective way to make sure that the supports are in place, essentially. Similarly, for obsessive compulsive disorder, characterized by like persistent distressing thoughts, urges or images, which are the obsessions, and then the compulsions being the repetitive actions that are taken to reduce the anxiety from the obsessions. So commonly this, a lot of traits of OCD are seen within autism, and there's also a high rate of co-occurrence between the two. So similarly, for this one, even if someone doesn't have a diagnosis of autism, but they've got a diagnosis of OCD, some of the challenges that you might think of traditionally with autism would be relevant still for OCD. And then acquired neurodivergence. Sorry if I'm speaking very quickly. Feel free to just watch this back on like 0.5 times speed. But for acquired neurodivergence, this is referring to conditions someone might experience like TBI, stroke, brain hemorrhage, and it can cause someone to develop atypical mental functioning. So sometimes dyslexia, we'll see the term alexia used, which is more so referring to essentially acquired dyslexia. You can see it in dementia as well. Sorry, I'm going to follow the mental health route. But there's a lot of things where the terminology is different based on whether it's neurodevelopmental or not, but the experience is the same. It's just down to origin. And when someone's in a workplace environment, it doesn't matter if they've acquired alexia or they've had dyslexia from birth. By and large, it just matters what challenges they're currently experiencing. Where am I? There I am. So these challenges, how do they present? People can be quite adept at hiding neurodivergent characteristics. I say characteristics instead of symptoms, sometimes interchangeably. That's what I mean by that. And that can be conscious or sort of unconsciously. They might, people might have heard the term masking, which is where someone presents in front of not having these challenges. So the term commonly used in autism of like someone essentially pretending not to be autistic in public. And it can become so sort of ingrained, especially since it's something that someone's had to develop throughout their life, that they're not aware that they're doing it, which can then make it more difficult to identify where the difficulties they're having are coming from, because they are maybe experiencing more fatigue because of having to do this additional work with masking, but not necessarily identifying the specific issues causing it. So the first step, if someone might have challenges associated with being neurodivergent, is to ask, funnily enough, and we'll cover that in a little bit because that's slightly easier said than done. However, even if you do ask, diagnosis in adulthood is quite common, especially for individuals who have learned to mask those neurodivergent traits. Well, where am I? There I am. The rates of diagnosis can vary as well between different population groups. So you might see more commonly like women aren't diagnosed until adulthood, either because they present differently with like autism, ADHD, etc., or just because those traits are more likely to be overlooked, even if they are presenting similarly. And there is a high likelihood you'll work with neurodivergent students or staff who aren't aware of the neurodivergent. It might be years down the line until they get a diagnosis. They might never get a diagnosis. If they get the right support in place, they might not be facing enough challenges to have to seek that route out, which will also get a bit of strain off services. So, you know, support in place, that's great. So it's quite difficult to say what specific challenges someone might present. And originally in one of these PowerPoints, I had just slides and slides of different challenges. That was a 2-hour presentation. I'm not going to keep you here for that long. So instead, we'll look at how even within the same diagnosis, there's a range of presentations. So 2 people with ADHD, if one person has predominantly inattentive ADHD, the other person predominantly hyperactive impulsive, they can have incredibly different experiences and presentations. Or conversely, because of the overlap of symptoms between conditions, someone, for example, with dyspraxia and someone who's autistic might be essentially facing the same challenges in this setting, even though they might face different challenges in different settings. So it's the variation itself in the severity of strengths and weaknesses, challenges, sorry, not weaknesses, is increasingly recognised as a common characteristic of most neurodivergent conditions, and that is referred to as a spiky profile, which if you've done the Oliver McGowan training, which you should, you might have already seen. And ability in any of these categories isn't fixed. It can vary even from day to day or within the same day, which can itself be a result of things like environmental stresses, time of day, like if someone's got a medication routine, reactions to external events, etc. And so instead of looking at those specific challenges, we can look at, if it wants to, there we go. They will vary from person to person. So there are some shared barriers, and there is quite a bit of, I say quite a bit, there's some literature discussing what barriers people, neurodivergent people, specifically in healthcare, face when they are working within those environments. Did a bit of a literature review, but the main themes that sort of arise are of identity. Identity essentially coming into play as a negative sense of self-worth that people have developed, usually as a result of attitudes and perception. So this is quite an important one, and it links in as well a lot to the enabling and disabling environments. But regarding attitudes and perception, something that was reported commonly throughout, these are pretty much all of the studies looking, these ones are for neurodivergent healthcare students. There are some the BMA in 2020 did a survey which had similar findings, but that was across medical students and qualified doctors. The BMA study found, when they were specifically asking people who are autistic, only 36% of doctors and medical students felt comfortable disclosing their disability, and 77% of those people reported the reason why they didn't feel comfortable was because they were worried about discrimination if they did disclose. And the people who did disclose, less than half of those, just 46%, after disclosing, received any support from colleagues. So it's not that that is a particularly rare occurrence or they're fearing for no reason. It was unfortunately not uncommon for people to have those fears confirmed once they do manage to work up to disclosing. And so that's a large part of the importance of combating essentially that culture of negative attitudes, because it can make it difficult not only to receive the proper support or to develop a more positive self-image, but even to identify if they are experiencing discrimination, because if that's part of the culture, then knowing where the boundaries are can be a lot more difficult. So people just learn to accept worse behaviour, essentially. So how do we combat that? Talking about neurodivergence, it can be difficult. So I've made a few frameworks. You don't have to follow these specifically. It can just help to have, I like an acronym, don't blame me. So the first thing we can do if we're having a discussion, and this is usually if you are someone who is essentially like personally responsible for the person you're discussing with, you don't want to just open conversations with like, you're autistic, ideally. But it can also be the case if you notice, if you're not someone's line manager, but you notice a colleague is struggling, if they haven't brought up neurodivergence, it's not the case that you have to go up and say, hey, do you think you might be neurodivergent? I've noticed you're experiencing these challenges. But more so asking more about if you've noticed challenges they're having, or if you're just the person, like that person's named, like generally like the students, a practice educator, or if you are like a line manager or you're sort of responsible for induction for new employees. Then asking about challenges that they have, and that could be, if they're not sure, it can help asking about previous employment or placements, especially if they have had any previous like occupational health reports. If they have had a workplace needs assessment, they can have a report. But if that's not the case, which quite often it won't be because people might not be diagnosed, or they might have difficulty accessing that support, generally you can just ask whether or not they feel that they will benefit from adjustments. It doesn't have to be asking specific challenges or drilling deep into it unless they want some support identifying how they might benefit from specific adjustments. It can just be, have you noticed anything about this environment that if we change a couple of things would make it a lot easier for you to go about your job, essentially. So asking, just as important, I feel, even though it is one of the simplest steps, is just responding positively if people do disclose, or if they, even if it's not a diagnosis, they just disclose the challenges they're having. and then working together to love a SMART goal, find solutions and set those goals. So you can ask for additional information, ideally not asking sort of about the conditions specifically they have if they've disclosed something, but just about what it means for them. So about either those challenges they're having or about strengths. We love a strengths-based approach. And that is sort of one of the foundations for then when you can start building those goals or just like breaking it down into smaller steps. And then again, very important is checking in. It's not just sort of a one and done scenario of, well, you've got your Dragon Medical One software in place, you can get your speech to text, you're set, because there might be adjustments that don't necessarily work for someone. It could be that their role develops over time, or as they take on additional responsibilities, they're finding more challenges in place. So having continued check-ins, either informally, just periodically, or sort of having a set every couple of months, a one-to-one, just to check in. And that can be especially helpful if someone's not certain how to raise concerns or difficulties that they are having, knowing that they have that protected time to discuss that in a formal manner can be helpful. And then again, what do we ask? So adjustments, strengths and knowledge is what we say. So you can just start by saying, are there any reasonable adjustments you have? You don't need to ask why, it can just be the case. In employment, generally someone would have to state that they are that they identify as having a disability in order to be legally entitled to reasonable adjustments. Ideally, we would be doing more than the legal bare minimum. If someone hasn't necessarily disclosed a disability, but they're experiencing these challenges and they've spoken about them, it doesn't mean that they have to then disclose a disability or get a diagnosis to access that support. And this is especially the case in regards to students. The law is slightly different between the students and employees. For students, education is seen as essentially like a facility or a service. And so reasonable adjustments, rather than being reactive to someone saying what they need, should be anticipatory. So they're sort of put in place in order to make those adjustments as they are needed for students, without them having to spend years down the line and then not be able to complete their degree because there's a 3-year waiting list for an ADHD assessment. And as those adjustments that are helpful for students, generally equally helpful for employees as well. So if you have that anticipatory duty, if you have any students at all in your location, having those adjustments in place, you can then just access those same things for employees, and it makes it very helpful all around. Again, love a strengths-based approach. But again, you don't have to ask specifically about like, what is dyslexia, that sort of thing, but just what does it mean for that person? What do they struggle with in that environment? And again, I know I'm speeding through it. The slide, this is why I always say the slides will be sent out. I hope no one's trying to take notes. So as mentioned, not everyone is going to have a diagnosis or even personal recognition of a neurodivergent condition. And so there are some things you can do that everyone will benefit from. You might have heard of the idea of universal design, which refers to physical locations and to like the processes in place. It aims to make all of these accessible by design, rather than needing to then implement reasonable adjustments to make up for inaccessibility. So some of the things that can be very helpful. Again, this is from the phrasing of students, because that's what I usually do this for, but again, it's very helpful for staff as well. Pre-placement visit. This is being the weeks leading up to placement. For staff, this would sort of be in the form of an orientation taking place prior to their start date. And it gives an opportunity for you to ask about their needs, start implementing adjustments if needed, and it allows that person to familiarise himself with the area, the role, meet their supervisors and colleagues. Having an induction, which a lot of places they'd say, obviously we have an induction. Other places do need to be told that, but it can be difficult to set up an induction, especially if it's if you might be an area that gets a lot of students, or if you have like a lot of locums or just high staff turnover, it can be difficult to set up an induction for every person. So it can also be really helpful just to have an induction booklet. That can take a bit of a time commitment to get a thorough induction booklet into place. That's something that students are helpful for, because it works towards a lot of proficiencies and competencies, both the NMC ones and the HCPC ones. And it's something, if you can have that in place and then continue to update it and work on it, it functions both as sort of an induction, but then also a form of peer support, so people can then feel not only that they know more about what's going on, but if it's written by someone who's been in a similar position to them, then it is in a lot of a better position to answer the questions that they're going to have. Similarly, guides, another thing, like standardized how-to guides for completing processes and procedures, which these are often thought about in terms of software. So like, I don't know what systems people use. System 1 is the one that we tend to use here. So there's a lot of System 1 how-tos, but it doesn't just need to be for software. It can be for forms of assessment, or just when things go wrong. This is the flow chart essentially. It doesn't need to be every single thing, but just enough of a starter so that people don't feel lost and overwhelmed if they are either new to an area or new to having these specific responsibilities. Again, this is something that students can help with, especially if it's sort of like building one from scratch and then having people who are more familiar with it to sort of take over just to make sure everything's correct. And this one's in big writing because this one's important. Very important to provide clear routes of support and escalation, and how to safely raise concerns if people aren't being treated fairly. So it's an incredibly common occurrence. I haven't spoken personally to a neurodivergent healthcare student yet who hasn't had at least one negative encounter with a supervisor or educator on a placement. There was recently in my placement area, a concern was raised by another student informally through sort of a peer mentorship system. So after they disclosed that they were autistic, they were spoken to from their report in a condescending way, like a child, by the educator, which was evident as well from them reviewing sort of the action plan that had been put into place, even though they were not struggling on that placement. And the fact that they had the informal, accessible route of support meant the issue was resolved quickly without the student having to disclose to additional members of staff or lodge any formal complaints. I know it looks like there's more slides left, but a lot of these ones at the end are optional, so that's why I've said them out. This as well, this one is not only specific to neurodivergent or disabled students and colleagues. So we had another concern in our area recently where there was a transgender student in our hospital was told he couldn't use the changing rooms until the matter was discussed with the practice learning team a couple of weeks down the line. And he wasn't given an alternative changing location to use in the meantime, so he had to use an accessible toilet. There wasn't any sort of secondary route for him to raise this and get support because it was the practice educator who had been the one to sort of instigate the situation. So he eventually had to go through the SOR, the Society of Radiographers. He was a radiography student. He didn't just pick union out of a hat. But ideally, you should have the support in-house to be able to resolve these things before union involvement becomes necessary. And so having robust routes of support and escalation made clear to all staff and students in place is how to achieve that. We say having at least 2 distinct formal routes of support, and then making it very clear what process to follow if they do need to raise concerns, and they need to have protection in place. Obviously, there's whistleblower protections, but for informal things as well, there needs to be policy in place to protect that. And I know it's not like you can't just send every individual person away, like just make a policy change. It's easy as that. But there are things we can work on, like becoming. Hopefully, you'll have either Freedom to Speak Up guardians or sort of equivalent to that. But you can also have Freedom to Speak Up champions, which, if that's something you're interested in, is something that is a role available to pretty much any staff within settings that have the Freedom to Speak Up scheme. And then also those informal things as well, like the peer mentorship scheme, looking at having things in place. Can people see this, or is the writing too small? This is the last proper slide. Yeah.
We can see it here.
This is just an example of, like, because I like to give a couple of little actionable things, and I'll send out this sort of email template as well afterwards. But it's an example of an email that can be sent out prior to starting either a placement or a new job. So, first part, giving clear instructions and expectations for someone's first day or any subsequent days, really. Just making expectations clear for all students and new colleagues, and that helps for a wide range of challenges, like difficulty with uncertainty or social interaction, or any challenges that someone like self-manages, because it gives them a chance to prepare. Having the information booklet, and where possible completing a proper induction as well. I don't know if people have heard of a Chloe form. There's also alternatives like a one-page profile. The RCN has a health ability passport for staff and a placement passport for students. You don't need to be a member of the RCN to access those. They're just online. I can send the links. But these are things that a person can fill out if they don't have or if they do have like an occupational health report in place, things like that. this can be a more in-depth and from that person's own perspective account of what challenges they might be experiencing, what adjustments they found helpful before, or they might find helpful here, and then just best ways of communicating with them. There we go. As we were saying, occupational health report, placement support plans, or things like if someone's had an access to work assessment in the past, then things like a workplace needs assessment report. Just asking for those in advance essentially as a way to start conversations. And then, very importantly, keeping things confidential unless the person gives specific consent. Not just in general, they say, oh, it's okay to share it, but confirm the people you're sharing it with, or if you feel like the person would benefit from you sharing it with specific people. And then, even then, it might be the person prefers to reach out themselves just so that they know what information is being shared. And the pre-placement visit, as we've said. This is all the legal things. I think just looking at the names of some of the things you've covered in past sessions, you've looked at the Equality Act and such. So there's things that cover these, which, it's all written in the Act. You can see it, and in the Code of Practice. One of the main things that's helpful is who's paying for this. And then just knowing about some of the routes of funding that people can access, just because that way you can just suggest it if it is needed. So for students, it's largely through Disabled Students Allowance, which covers adjustments in placements as well as in academic settings. Staff can have access to work, and then apprentices are in sort of a grey area, which is why it's helpful to include. For placement related adjustments, they can access funding through access to work. For academic adjustments, it generally has to be through a learning support fund, which won't necessarily be too relevant for your area of practice because you aren't, the academic institution. But if someone is just discussing challenges they're having within academic institutions, just knowing these things can be really helpful to share with people, because it gives them an area to look. This is the thing where this is sort of an optional area, which is it's like interactive when we send out the slide. So if you do have someone who says, I'm having issues with sensory processing, you can have a quick look. This is a slightly more in-depth version of some of the things that you'll see in that practice-based learning guide that I talked about before that Shine developed. And so I'm going to skip through all these because they're just a bit of an option just in case we finish early. I've never finished early. But yeah, I don't think we've got time for questions because we're 3 minutes over, but I'm more than happy to, if there are any.
Thanks. Thank you so much, James, for that whistle-stop presentation. It was really informative, to be honest. But like you said, people can feel free to go back and view the recordings when they're uploaded. I will just post a link to the website where they'll be uploaded. And again, just a reminder to join for episode 4. We'll just give a couple of seconds for anybody who has a pressing question.
Or if anyone wants to speak out loud. That's fine. Lots to think about, definitely is one way of saying.
Right.
One of the first ones I did was 2 hours, and since then I've just been condensing it. But yeah, thank you everyone for staying behind a little bit as well. I hope that helped.
That's really helpful, James. And like you said, we'll be sending the presentation around so we can have a look at that as well. But thank you all for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all for the next episode.